follows an extract from my book Fête Fatale, available from Amazon. Chapter 3, Part 1. Although the fête didn't officially open until 10:30 that morning, and owing to the military precision of the last couple of weeks, there was no particular need for Beth to rush. Nevertheless, Beth found herself waking early that morning. After pottering around downstairs and clattering dishes into the dishwasher, she emerged into the bedroom bearing a tray laden with tea and toast. Drew sat up in bed and, munching his toast, began leafing through the next in the series of novels he had recently discovered. Beth gulped the last of her tea and stood up. Walking over to the bed, she kissed Drew's forehead. "Once more onto the breech, dear boy. Let's get this show on the road." Walking into the bathroom and looking back over her shoulder, she shouted, "You shouldn't eat toast in bed. You know the crumbs supernaturally migrate to the bottom of the sheets." At the same time that Beth and Drew were munching on their breakfast, John Barlow was sitting in his study, making a last attempt at researching points to look for when judging varieties of poultry. Even if everything else was falling around him in ruins, he was going to make sure that he did a good job today. He'd had to sit Jean down and explain to her the failing nature of his foreign business interests and what that would mean in their daily life for the time being. He was surprised that the tête-à-tête had gone as well as it had, but in many ways that made it even harder for him to bear. Jean had been disappointed but understanding. Her natural reserve didn't allow her to express too much sympathy, but he could see that she'd understood his worries. He knew that it was going to be difficult for her to adjust to a little economy, but she said that she was willing to toe the line, and for that he was grateful. Her only point of refusal was that she insisted that she wasn't willing to slave over a hot cooker every mealtime. She was too busy for that. John could acknowledge that for years his wife had been a prominent member on the WI committee and also sat on the choir's general committee and music subcommittee. She was also a regular helper at the residential home in Alderley and the charity shop linked to it. He could understand that she wasn't willing to give up these activities and they'd have to continue to eat out as a rule. If he was honest, he wasn't sure that this would be possible, but he'd cross that bridge later. At least for now, Jean had willingly agreed to spend less generally on non-essentials and would ask Henrietta to come in and clean only once a week for now. Nevertheless, he felt ashamed at having to broach such a topic, and his sense of failure was strong. He resumed his reading of the library books on showing poultry that he'd hired. He'd at least make sure that he made a success of the competition today. The weather that morning was typically British in its ambiguity, leaving plenty of opportunity for debate on how to arrange the fête. As Beth and Drew pulled up onto the car park, discussions were heating up as to whether to host the stalls inside the hall as much as possible, or if the tables and gazebos might be erected outside. Nathaniel and Emma, with Primrose belted in between them, pulled the truck into the quickly filling car park. They carried an assortment of canvas, steel tubes and pegs, which would soon transform into gazebos and tents to host the stalls. The question of the weather was raised, and Nathaniel cast an expert glance into the cloudscape and predicted clear, dry skies for the day. Farmer Jim said that the cows would have dry pasture into next week before rotating the grazing, and he's never wrong. The expertise of Nathaniel and Farmer Jim settled the matter and galvanised the workforce into action. Much pacing of plots and laying out of poles swiftly followed over the next hour. The exhibits for each of the stalls had been placed in groups inside the village hall, and it would be swift work to relocate the stock for each stall once the tents were up. This was the best part of the day as far as Beth and Emma were concerned. They imagined that they were like Amy March from Little Women as she was setting out her art display. In the classic tale, small acts of jealousy robbed Amy of her wonderful stall, and she was demoted to a wilting flower stand. Thankfully, at this fête, any discrepancies were unlikely to result in open rivalry, and Beth and Emma revelled in creating an artistic display of cakes, jam, curds and chutneys. Beth had also hit upon how to solve the dilemma of how to best occupy Betty and had created a traditional bran tub. This wouldn't be too tiring, as Betty could sit at the stall to sell tickets for each person to delve into the tub, and then once all the tickets were sold and the prizes retrieved, she could bask in the satisfaction of a job well done and then wander at will. Beth also had a strange ulterior motive for introducing the bran tub into the fête. As a piano teacher, she was always trying to find new ways to encourage pupils to practice their scales. She'd been given what she thought was an excellent tip. If each scale was written on a separate slip of paper, which was then folded up and placed in a tub, she'd suggested that students could make a scales bran tub, and they could pick out scales at random to test themselves. The idea would have been perfect were it not for the fact that the younger students had no idea of what a bran tub was. Here was the perfect opportunity to remedy this gap in their education. It was not only the ladies who were subject to the last-minute bursts of inspiration. Drew and Nathaniel had mysteriously disappeared once the framework of the tents were up. They reappeared about half an hour later on their motorbikes and then vanished again, only to quickly reappear in one of Farmer Jim's tractors, and behind them came Matt in an E-Type Jaguar sports car loaned from an enthusiasts club he belonged to. It seems that they had run off to get the go-ahead from May and had then created an impromptu motor vehicle display in an empty corner of the field. Standing side by side were Nathaniel's Triumph Tiger and Drew's Triumph Bonneville motorbikes. They'd even crossed a pair of Union Jack flags at the back end of each bike. Drew had called Matt to contact his friend to include the Jaguar for the day. The car was loaned on the proviso that the promotional material for the club could be on display, and on the promise that the car wouldn't be left unsupervised. The tractor was the final burst of inspiration, and Nathaniel expected to be kept busy lifting eager boys and girls in and out of the driver's cab. Primrose was prettily modelling the Bonneville, as Drew explained. I thought that this would redress the testosterone balance a little. When the chaps are fed up of jam and cake, they can come and hang out in the man zone for a bit. That's a fantastic display. Well done, guys. I think it's a great idea to have some attractions that don't need to be paid for, said Beth. I've spoken to Terry and he's happy to keep an eye on things if we need to help elsewhere, said Drew. It's impossible for him with the wheelchair on the grass, and I think he'll be quite content to sit in an E-Type for most of the day if we don't abandon him entirely and keep him supplied with tea and cake. Not consumed in the car, of course. I don't think he'll be short of company. In fact, I think he'll be at the centre of attention here, where the men and children are concerned, said Beth. The fête was soon due to officially open, and there was a converging of members to the village hall as the sense of expectancy rose. May took hold of the opportunity and banged a set of teaspoons on a trestle table to attract everybody's attention and make an address. Firstly, let me say a huge thank you to everybody who has worked so hard to get today's fête up and running. I won't begin to try and name everybody. I know that all of you have worked exceptionally hard over the last few weeks, and I know that the work is far from over. I hope that you've enjoyed the buzz of preparation, and I hope that you will enjoy seeing the fruit of your labours as the crowds arrive and enjoy the day, she began. In a few moments the fête will officially open, and Darcy will be taking up her position at the pathway to take admission fees shortly. I hope that you all have lots of interest in your stalls. All that I ask is that you look out to help one another and that you have a good time chatting to our visitors. Remember, each one of you is representing the Mossleigh Women's Institute, and our aim isn't simply to raise money, but to raise the profile of our group. Enjoy the day. A thundering round of applause seemed the best response. Nobody really knew quite what they were applauding. Most probably they were recognising the effort that they had all put into the fête, and it was also an outbreak of celebration, recognising a high point in the social calendar of the village. May was wise enough to know that they weren't applauding her rousing speech, and so she stepped away from the central focus and joined in the applause. That seemed to cover it, and the sound gradually faded as people headed off to their posts. Darcy picked up her cash box along with a flower stamp and ink pad ready to steer the tide of visitors through the entrance stile that had been concocted. For the price of £1, you purchased an impermanent tattoo of a buttercup and subsequent entry into the field with all its delights. Some years ago, Darcy had emigrated from Mount Rainier, Washington to England and now resided in the village of Mossleigh. She had followed her husband around the globe as his career had dictated. Once his corporate days had finished, it was expected that they would jet back to the USA, but neither of them seemed in a hurry to return, and it was now presumed that they were in Mossleigh to stay. Darcy had occupied the position of treasurer for the Mossleigh WI for 2 years now, and, so long as she was happy to continue, nobody desired to jockey for her position. Her no-nonsense American manner and shrewd sense of business were excellent qualifications for the role. The magical extra ingredient to her success was that she was also genuinely kind and was utterly committed to Mossleigh village life. She was firm but fair, with compassion where needed. Everybody liked Darcy, even if they were a little afraid of her. For the full book of Fête Fatale, available in paperback or as an ebook, follow the link in the cards in the description box or find details on my website at sharonbill.com. Thanks for listening.